a step because we said we'd do that, and then we're so tiny and driven all the time. We haven't even done that.
Simon first, Mine keeps peeling. My identity's gone.
Have we met?
Hi, Simon first from Blood Axe Books.
Anyway, Becky Swift, the literary consultant.
Okay. Yeah, have we met? We must have done.
Hi.
I'm Jack Haynes from the Publishers Association.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Swift. I run the literary consultancy.
Hi, I'm Simon Thirst from Blood Axe.
Hi. Nice
Calvin's
to meet you. Love Blood Axe.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm Simon Thirst
Hi.
from Blood Axe Books.
From the
Blood Axe Books.
Association.
Poetry publishing.
Publishers.
Yeah.
I quote with poets here, poetry organisation. Got the best content.
Well, we waste a lot of them.
Amen.
Hi, Cody, Poetry London.
No, shall I go and round him up?
No, don't worry. Do you have his number or something?
I can get it.
These aren't big enough to read, is it?
No, they're not. You
So-
sort of end up doing
Which-
this, don't
yeah.
you?
Which is okay with the bird.
I'd have insisted that we'd all have to already introduce ourselves to do away with labels.
Jack Haynes from
Well,
the
You know,
Publishers
there's lots of talk,
Association.
isn't there? We can actually all just go and do the same.
Sorry.
Maybe
Jack
I'm wrong.
Haynes.
After a time, memory causes a problem.
That's true.
Oh, the writing's tiny.
That's true. I'm a great admirer of Blood Axe.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Is that Nature?
Yeah, so it's an academic journal.
No, of course. They're the oldest and most read.
Yeah.
Give me a ring.
Oh yeah, okay, so I'm Rebecca. One B2Cs.
How do you find that Samsung?
Sorry?
How do you find that?
The company's literary consultancy.
Not too bad, to be honest. It's the Office one, which I inherited from my predecessor.
So I
to refigure. But it's
Not
it's a
published,
job.
but
My
we
father's
we
sort of I have
do
choices
good
to
stuff.
what I
People send us manuscripts,
all the rest of it. And like,
and then we yeah, exactly.
Does it use an app? Can you use a keyboard?
Linking to
well, it does have
But yeah,
when you need it to write. It's not too bad. It's not as minute as some of the others. But
The website is just
it kind of
consultant. Yeah.
Can you do spreadsheets on it?
I don't really think so.
We've got partial funding from the Arts
HTC,
Council,
which is
so
really too
we're,
small.
like I said, we're
I
one
mean,
of
I
the
can look
happily
at
coercing.
stuff.
We you know, we had to be here basically.
sorry for the delay with getting
Because
this
the
going.
Arts Council
Thank you
required
for joining
that
us. Perhaps we could go around quickly and just say who we are and where we're from, so we can get to know who's in the room a bit. So I'm Michelle Leff from Judy's Place.
Roseanne Campbell from Macmillan, also looking for nature. Jacoby Noir, Poetry London.
Jack Haynes from the Publishers Association.
Simon Thirst from Blood Axe Books.
I'm Ed Doger, I'm from the Poetry Society.
I'm Rebecca Swift, Director of the Literary Consultancy.
I'm Lee and I'm from Calvin's.
I think you know who I am.
Brilliant. So this is an opportunity really for us to drill down into some of the questions that Peter threw up earlier today, and also bring in any other issues that is preoccupying you specifically about publishing and digital. And we do have some framing questions if we find them useful, namely, you know, what do we think sustainability looks like for publishing and digital? And I think some of the complexities behind that have already kind of been thrown up, and I think it would be really nice if we could come to the end of the discussion with a few really practical takeaways that we can all go away with and think about for ourselves and our own organisations.
I think before we start, it might be helpful just to understand, you know, from people around here, the extent to which digital is part of what you do.
a bit about how we are thinking we might be able to apply some of this as well, how we actually work, maybe a little bit. Do you want to-
Sure. Okay, so we have digital and print publication, a huge online papers and front half part of our magazine. We also publish a weekly journal for Nature, and we have the monthly journals, and we also have our print publication books as well. But also internally, we are moving towards maybe a bit more of a paperless office. And I know this is a lot of what some companies are moving towards. So it's kind of that idea between reading online and reading physically. A real book is something that I'm quite interested in hearing people's thoughts about today. What people want to read, how people want to read their manuscripts, and how people their books, and just working towards the best way to do that.
Poetry in London is a bit of there are a few issues really. I mean, we have a website, and that's probably the extent of our digital existence at the moment, as well as the social networking. But we're not publishing digitally. We have, although in broad terms we're not publishing a lot of magazines, we do have a lot of things that bring paper into our offices, and paper seems to cling to us wherever we go. The big paper burden is probably our annual competition, and at the moment we are shifting more towards online entry, but this hasn't actually cut the amount of paper that we're using, because we're still doing almost as much printing, and so we're kind of, the digital isn't really reducing our paper at the moment, so we're having to look at how we can just move forward on that.
I think probably our points will be mostly sort of similar to Peter's from the presentation earlier. And when it comes to digital in particular, things like scientific journals, I'm sure you saw yesterday there was a report out about good countries in the world, and Britain came top for things like science and technology. And one of the sort of key contributing factors was academic journals and readership. For our industry, digital has been a huge recent player over the last couple of years, growing vastly, so over 300% in 3 years. So we're very keen to see that, if it's getting us a new audience, new readership, if we're able to show if UK publishers are able to influence the world. So for example, Nature being the world's most read scientific journal, which is very good for us to be able to talk about. But on the other hand, our view is generally sort of we support our publishers however they want to see their works published. So whether that's paper or digital, we're happy to see it as long as people are reading it. So that's our sort of general view.
Well, Blood Xbox publishes about 35 books a year, so we have hundreds in our back. And we have about 100 books on as e-books at the moment. All our new books, virtually except the anthologies where rights are sometimes a difficulty, are coming out as e-books. Only about 3% of our sales are e-books, and we think that's because it's poetry. We have a book about how to get into writing, how to write poetry, which will sell about 30% through e-books. Anecdotally, we think maybe some of the e-books, or perhaps a high proportion of the e-books, are bought by people as a secondary copy, perhaps people in the industry, to take with them on their e-books and so on, for review purposes. One of the things that was mentioned earlier was returns, which is a huge headache for us. And we're selling about 60,000 books a year. But and Andy was like, Tim getting cross about the returns, as it's such a waste, which it is if you think about the transport of books from the printer to the distributor, from the distributor to the shops or festivals, then back again. And then, of course, they've got to go out again. We pay about 15% to our distributor on returns. Those are books that haven't been sold. So any book that hasn't been sold has already lost its profit. Huge incentive for us not to do that. So we are very resistant to festivals over-ordering copies, authors over-ordering copies. They love to over-order. They love a big display of their books at festivals and events, and we hate it. So, I mean, all of these things. The other thing I should say about poetry, is there's a few people here involved in poetry, is that a poetry book is for a long time. It's not like a crime or romance where you just read it and pass it on to somebody. You keep poetry books, and so the quality of the paper has to be sufficient to not deteriorate, we would say, over 10 or 12 years. The quality of the printing has got to be to a certain standard that people enjoy the experience of the book, which is reflected in that only 3% ebook sales. So that's a big issue for us. Nevertheless, we do use paper only from sustainable forests, so we can go that far. We've also produced a big anthology called Earth Shattering of environmental poets. So very much support what you're doing, and that trying to change the customers' opinions so that they will want to buy stuff that is sustainable. But we're already not an economic model. That's why we get the grant funding. So we must not put ourselves at a huge disadvantage. You know, we can't print poetry on recyclable paper that can go straight in the loo afterwards. It just won't work for our industry. We've got to do what works for us and what people will buy. So those are our dilemmas. We're caught, we feel, but we're pushing, trying to do what we can, and we have an environmental policy.
So we produce a series of publications that are print publications. We're currently redeveloping our website, and we're in the early stages of that. And then potentially we would be interested in ebook publishing for possibly those publications or other publications that go with educational programs and so on. We produce quite a lot of online resources at the moment that are downloaded. We've recently moved to allowing online submissions to one of our journals, the Poetry Review, for international entries, and one of the concerns that we have a bit is broadening that could mean an enormous influx, and how to control what we think it's a very good thing to be able to expand the region, to have people not just send paper and the editor can review these on screen and only print off what he needs to for looking and so on. But we could open the gates to an endless quantity as well, and we need to be careful about that bit. So yeah, those are some of the thoughts that we're thinking about.
Well, how we run is there are two of us in the office. We're based here at Freeword, but we have at full stretch 75 editors working from home all over the country. So people submit to us manuscripts, but to date, I don't think it's ethical to ask my readers to read and assess manuscripts, which is their job, online. So I know that a lot of publishers are moving to editing online. My eyes pack in online very quickly, so I think why is it fair to ask my readers to do that? I begin to feel slightly sick at the end of the day online and so on. So, yeah, so that, I mean, so there's one thing. One is that we use paper to produce our reports, but all the readers are producing them from their own home. So, what should I say? People send us manuscripts. We can't, at the moment, we don't say you can only send us manuscripts on recycled paper, for example. But we could encourage that, I'm realising. We could also encourage our readers, their end, to stock recycled paper, but they all get their own supplies. We obviously have some paper in-house, and we can shift, and I've already got a lead from Lee, which, to be honest, I've never... I said I would last year get recycled paper. I never did, because we're just so small and pushed. But what concerns me, you know, that's one thing, but and we see about 600 manuscripts a year, so it's a significant amount of paper going around the place. But we do a lot of filing online and whatever. But then we advise writers what to do next. So we're having increasingly conversations where we're inviting people to digitally publish. We just ran a conference, and Amazon were here and Kobo sponsored it. So we've got the digital publishers sniffing around us for writing talent. And then we also broker work through literary agents to traditional publishers. But again, this is why I was getting frustrated about not knowing, you know, what kind of conversations to have with people, because it would be good even if we just say, you know, I don't think but I'm afraid I don't think get everything going onto the internet is necessarily a solution. It seems to me easier to grow forests again than it is to just build everything up in the cloud in a desert that is using more electricity than we've got on the planet. So increasingly I am really quite concerned, if I'm going to take this seriously, about the very neat idea that digital is going to solve the environmental problem. I think it's more complicated than that. And so I don't think just using less paper is necessarily an answer. I mean, I could be wrong.
No, the argument between digital or physical is quite balanced.
Yes. So anyway, so that's where we're positioned. So we're sort of brokers. A lot of paper comes through us, but not necessarily through the actual office. But I'm beginning to see ways in which we could make recommendations. But it'd be very difficult for us to insist, for example, that our readers who are pretty poor, you know, we don't, you know, then having to buy a higher price paper or something. But we can certainly make recommends, and we could certainly start stocking that ourselves. And as for, we also run events here. We're a founding member of FreeWord, and but we very much sell on the back of their commitment to this, and you know, refer everybody to their structures for events. But again, I can see that we could encourage people. We could make a note about how people are getting to the events and stuff, which we don't currently do. So, you know, just messaging is I think what we're best at actually across the board. And in our newsletter, we can make a recommendation. So it's helpful to learn what the recommendations are, because I really haven't engaged properly hitherto, sort of thing. So if there are things I know to recommend, then we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say what digital means to Calvert's, it can mean a couple of different things. As first and foremost with printers, I'd say it's a form of print technique, it's digital printing, which is a growth area for us and probably for quite a few printers, because it enables people to produce smaller volumes of print quicker, more cost effective, and using less paper. So all the time since I've been at Calvert's, which is about 7 or 8 years now, we've gone from one digital print machine to 2 print machines, because that's an area which is kind of growing. But the overall trend is for a reduction in print runs, which for our kind of other press, which is, not sure everyone's familiar with different print techniques, but it's litho printing, which a lot of commercial mainstream publishers would use for their printing. That has kind of decreased because the levels of print runs are kind of falling. So digital means, to Calvert's anyway, a print technique, but it can also mean like a wider spectrum of managing digital content for people. So we also are involved in kind of design and creation of materials which could be used in a variety of different digital formats, whether it's a website, an app, it could be like an email newsletter. So digital as a wider form of concept is managing content, and I think that's the kind of balance we're trying to create at the moment. Is various different ways to output content, from digital print, litho printing, electronic format, and that's kind of where we are.
Some interesting sort of points and sort of different stages that people are at in terms of engagement with digital. Before we go to digital, can we just on the print side of things? There's a sort of the hierarchy of papers which are sort of generally endorsed as being sort of more environmentally friendly, with either sort of post-consumer waste or FSC certified as being the ones which are generally by environmental NGOs thought of being best. And then after that, the challenge is around ensuring that the sourcing is understood and that they're not coming from illegal sources. To what extent do people use post-consumer waste papers? Because for us, we have some issues that you have, which mean that the quality of recycled doesn't allow us to do that. Is that sort of a general thing?
Yeah, so when our Nature Climate Change was published on post-consumer waste paper, and it still is, but there were people in the readership that would raise concerns about the see-throughness of the paper, or about what you were talking about it lasting as well, because people do keep copies of Nature for reference endlessly. So there are issues with that, I think, and that's a specific issue. I think our journals are published on not as environmentally friendly paper because of those concerns.
And did we be able to change behaviour?
Well,
did you get through it on the basis?
Single-handedly. Well, I mean, I think it's always going to be a slow process and things like that. But the paper type was juggled with so that it was less see-through, and I think I'm not sure about concerns about how much it's lasting. I'm not sure about that either, but it's definitely something that we're working towards as a company.
But is there not a good quality paper that comes from a rechargeable forest structure? I mean, I kind of feel I know you've done all this work, but need to drill down into sort of range of variants that there are. So, for example, there must be certain environments producing paper that are doing it ecologically minded, and so it doesn't have to be recycled as long as it's from that forest which is replenishing itself, or is it not, or and it could also be recycled, but so am I making sense?
Yeah.
Well, I just think, everybody's so specific. It doesn't matter the quality of what our paper is, even though we haven't yet sourced it, because it's in one ear, out the other, and then goes straight to waste, and we're not publishers. But clearly,
it's more electricity intensive to remove the inks from the original papers,
Right.
and the fibres themselves, you can recycle them 4 times and then they become tissue paper. So,
Okay.
so you need, you know, have so much. So there's always needs to be some sort of virgin fibre coming into the system.
Yeah, another very good trip to a French paper mill last year, and it's where they process a lot of European waste paper and produce FSC certified paper for printers and publishers all over Europe. It was a very good educational experience. We've got an article on our website about it, which I'm happy to forward people. And it was really good to see, you know, paper making process in action. And even as Peter said, even if paper's 100% recycled, every now and again, they need to put in some virgin fibres just to kind of keep it going, kind of thing. 'Cause, you know, it's not totally sustainable. But
I think it's worth emphasising what Lee's saying, that we're in a process of constant change, actually, and it's not that long ago, it's probably 30 years ago, that all the books were done by letterpress on old traditional printing presses, and so, or all poetry books, I mean, and there are a lot of readers who've missed that. They're still looking for those hardback books, slim hardback books with letterpress ink and on soft paper that they kind of love, and the move into trade paperback is still something a lot of readers are struggling with. Actually, a lot of poetry readers are elderly. It's younger poetry buyers tend to go for spoken word and magazines and that sort of thing, and then perhaps they graduate to books and so on. Obviously that's a huge generalisation, and there are all sorts of different people, but so I'm sure people take exception to what I'm saying, but there is that sort of element to it. So going off to offset and now to digital is part of a gradual change which may well keep changing. And I remember a few years ago at the London Book Fair, people were demonstrating a machine to print books on the spot, and it was being widely forecast that every bookshop would just have one of these, basically a huge photocopier which would produce books, and you'd just say, I want that book, and they'd print it out and it would be there in half an hour or whatever, all bound up. It didn't work. It ended up going to Cambridge to print out the theses of doctors who wanted to be published. It just didn't catch on, didn't work. So it's the customer, in a sense, that decides it.
There's also that question about shared resources. Like, if every bookshop has a printer, is that a better use of technology or resources than having a centralised?
Saves the lorries.
Yes,
you know.
well, it saves the lorries, but does it save all the components that go into making that printer and all of the things that go into making the printer? So you're talking about being at home and publishing everything, and publishing, like, printing your own stuff, like, and I'm sure a lot of readers of Nature print their own PDFs of the article that they're reading.
Yeah.
But is that better than just getting the actual Nature delivered to their door?
There's also, of course, and it's probably not an issue with people printing it off one copy for their own use, but with copyright, which is a huge issue, which we have to go around the world sorting out. I mean, particularly in the Chinese and Indian markets, we have huge amounts of piracy, which is both from digital to then physical, and then printed with either very substandard paper or actually in some cases much better quality paper but illegally sourced. Toxic inks, sort of, and glues in the bindings, things like that. So there's not only the environmental hazards, but there's the fact that there are thousands and thousands and thousands of copies of books which will be taken out of the which are from forests, which are just clear cut. And when we work with agencies police agencies to track them down, until there's a trial, those books will sit in a warehouse, so they're not even doing any good. It's just they're put in the warehouse and then burnt after.
So is this a problem post the PDF, or did it pre-exist? when
No,
it was
this has existed pretty much
Right.
as long as there's been transcripts,
Yeah.
but it's got a lot worse over the last couple of years. With the day you publish something online, you
Yeah.
can probably find it already being printed
Wow.
in book districts. You know that for China, for export to African markets or Asian markets,
Yeah.
and so it is an issue. And as those are physical copies.
How can you track that?
Oh, well-
how do you get notified about this? And you just
It's generally when people, we work with British Council and UKTI, we also work with the embassies, so it's usually sort of part of the organised crime investigations. I mean, the pirates are not one guy doing it just for his own use, it'll be 85,000 copies of Harry Potter, for example. So, and so we'll work with the agency, and when they find a copy, they'll generally be able to then track it and see if that's an actual version. Some of them are very, very, very good forgeries, which is a real problem.
So I guess the environmental implications of that are quite huge.
Well, it's vast. I mean, particularly it means that there's another 85,000 copies of a book that we don't know have been published, and that's 85,000 copies of paper which we didn't know about previously.
Yeah. Which could be illegal. The chemicals used could be dangerous.
And we just don't. I mean, it's a very tough one for publishers, but also for for the environment.
Because if people don't care about the copyright, they're not going to care about the other things either.
Well, they absolutely won't.
Gosh, I didn't even realise that was a problem. Oh.
So for this group, would information around paper certification and different sort of print models or print approaches, would that be helpful?
I think it would be very useful
Well,
to us
me,
to have
yeah,
that
definitely.
in a digestible, simple form. And we do that. We do press out printers and we're also under all sorts of other pressures to use UK printers, not to use foreign printers, and to all of that sort of thing. There are constant pressures all the time from different directions. When you're an Arts Council funded organisation, there is a sense of that.
UK printer.
Well,
it probably can be quite confusing, but you should always check to see whether the printer has an up-to-date environmental policy.
Well, we do that. And we've been with the same printer for quite a long time. We visit them regularly, but we have used 2 or 3 printers that we play off against each other.
Let's just ask lots of questions and see what responses you get. If you get sort of fairly quick responses that are well informed, then you know they're going.
Well, we go and visit the printing works from time to time to see.
That's a good thing to do as well.
But for us, it works better to have a long-term relationship and trust than it does for some of the other publishers that we know that we deal with, who have a policy of switching from one to the other all the time, which can be counterproductive, of course, because your influence is less.
So the environmental certification, ISO 14001, is one way of assessing
that would be very good to have that list.
So sorry, I'm so stupid at all this. So there's a list of suppliers that have got through the.
So I think it's a question for suppliers.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Only do you have the policy?
The environmental policy, what? What?
It's environmental policy or the ISO certification.
Yeah. And it's 14,001 for each of the.
14.
The number 14,000.
Yeah.
It's actually,
It's the environmental benchmark.
Yeah, 14,001.
So, but even with the ISO 14001, because I run the Calvert's environmental policy basically, and the management, there's different ways of getting the certification. You can do it and have it independently verified by an outside auditor. You should always check your supplier has got an outside certified ISO 14001, because I have heard some instances where it can be bought on the cheap off the shelf, And
Well, you
people
can self-certify as well.
people
Can
discuss
you
it.
not just recommend people to use?
So one thing that we're starting to do
Yeah.
is we've got a beta green suppliers database,
Right.
which is mapped out by location. And so there are already some green certified printers on there. We're also putting out a call basically to you guys that if there are people you use who are particularly good who aren't on there, then let's help get them out there as well. So that resource is there. We're also developing fact sheets for literature, which is exactly designed to work with people like Peter and Lee to emphatically say what we do know, where we do know paper quality and sourcing and that kind of thing. And so we can definitely share that information with you guys.
I think that's really important, back to real basics, and then like if we have that information, we can then publicise that information quite quickly through, the newsletter recipients, the readers, everybody at event, but I think it's, I wouldn't trust me and one other to do it properly. We might find an afternoon where we start looking, but to be frank, we don't really know what we're doing, and we'll soon be pressured by something else. But that would be fantastically helpful. And then what I would just say, we just use this, as a guide, as a map really, and then start telling other people about it.
One thing I just wanted to pick up on this, it's kind of been touched on, but we haven't explicitly mentioned it today, which is the kind of print on demand model, which is another thing that's being made possible by internet services, and it's also in some instances being kind of sold as another sustainable solution. But I know that again, that's one of the issues. I'm sure it's more complex than it lets on, and I wondered whether you guys might want to say something about that.
I would say generally there was a story about it out yesterday about in our trade paper, The Bookseller, particularly about Amazon maybe looking to introduce this as a part of negotiation with publishers.
In what respect?
As in, as part of your contract with Amazon,
Yeah.
as a publisher, they would be able to then supply print on demand on out of stock books, or books on an ongoing basis once the original run had finished. I think it's generally something which we wouldn't really be able to comment on, particularly until we've seen it in action. I think with print on demand, it very much depends on the publisher. Some would probably be okay with it if it's depending on the contract. I think it generally just it would depend on either an individual publisher or what book it was or what the size of the market would be. But as a concept, I don't think it's particularly dangerous for our industry. It might be for printing industry, for example, if we're looking to do a different style of contract or a different style of way of doing our runs.
Has that come up at all in your environmental review group in terms of the relative impact of sort of doing print runs with a set number of books versus printing as and when consumers want?
So different printing models has come up, as has custom publishing. So in the educational market, increasingly professors can say, that chapter, that chapter, that chapter, that chapter.
Yeah.
By 25 books, you can create a single custom published title.
Just by sections.
Amazing.
I mean, certainly in poetry, what we're finding with print on demand, we're not actually using print on demand yet because we can't get good quality books that are sewn as opposed to perfect bound, and perfect bound not being what it sounds like, in our opinion, and uses glues and various things like that, and tends to fall apart after it turns brittle and so on. So we want our books to be sewn, which can't really be done print on demand at the moment. And I think there is also a problem with quality on print on demand. Nevertheless, there is a model which is being looked at in certain quarters, which would be, in a sense, a new version of what used to be done with hardback and paperback, where you produce a high quality printed run to start with, but fairly short, which would probably be much more expensive, and then go over to a lower quality print on demand afterwards, which would of course hugely boost the first edition second-hand market, and it would make the urge to buy those first editions stronger. So there would be, it's quite an interesting and complicated.
I think that, yeah, the print on demand, I mean, my partner's bought books print on demand and they come and they're glued and they're not high standard, but it's fantastic for getting out of print Viragos. And so I don't know, but there are companies, I think, already doing that without copyright work, which is good. But I think that publishers, because I was at Virago Press, I have had some experience of publishing. I think that model whereby you've just described, where you somehow drive people to a higher premium for a quality run, but that you make available short-term, ethically sourced or what have you, print on demand, must massively make sense in an environment where, still publishers are still, obviously, from this morning's conversation, when I say failing, I mean it with the best love in the world, failing to predict markets, which is, no surprise to me. But that's the problem. They'll print, you'll do a print browser.
There are other environmental factors in here. Because if you go to, we use Macmillan's distribution. There's a huge warehouse just outside Swansea, absolutely huge, which has to be air conditioned and heated and all the rest of it. So that's a big thing. And these huge stacks of holding these pallets of books going right up into the sky, really. Now, the print-on-demand section in Macmillan has the books coming straight in, going straight out. You don't have to use these forklift trucks to download the books and
it's got to be the
put
future.
them back. It's just so much simpler when you see it in that environment, and you look at the storage charge, and we have to pay to contribute towards that air conditioning and heating and so on, and it's very expensive, and that of course goes on to the price of the book.
Yeah, but it's a shame if you can never then reproduce your beautiful poetry book to high quality again, but then I guess what you do is you made sure you'd recruited a readership before investing in it. And again, that to me is about communicating the message to the reader, saying, we have a problem here. We want, we want to continue to produce quality books. You want to buy them. This is what's happening. I mean, maybe because I founded TLC, which was totally new. All I've ever done is explain why we did what we do, and people are very ready to hear messages as long as they can see that they're coming from a sort of sound source. And I think that maybe publishing, I know, trying to directly communicate with readers more and more, because they're completely freaked out by what's happening in self-publishing, where writers communicate directly with readers and has the middleman gone and all that. But I think that publishers, sorry, I'm on a sort of soapbox, but we have just had a 3-day Writing the Digital Age conference. That is what we do. So I think the messaging is terribly important.
But it is, Lil confirmed this, that there will be more changes. The print on demand will get better. People may get print on demand, but you may get versions that are sewn. The self-publishing is okay, but it's limited. You lack that authority and that validation that you get from a press or.
Let's get going.
Okay.
So
not necessarily the case anymore. There are other sources of validation. The whole game's changing, but there'll always be room for experts. But they need to argue their case.
Well, I differ with you on that strongly.
Okay.
You need editors. You can't continue to have. Well, you will continue to have amateurly written, amateurly published, not edited very often manuscripts, but that's not an environmental question, except that you've got so many people producing books that aren't going to sell.
One of the things that Alison talked about in the session was the opportunity to provide advice to users, whether it's digital or indeed print. How sort of the environmental messages in the books or online. Things like, if you're not reading this, you're using this, read to switch it off. Has anyone done anything like that? Put out environmental messages?
No,
on
but
other
we could
physical
easily
ones?
do. It would be very in keeping with the way that we work to message our. We have a very direct relationship with people who come to us, so it'd be very easy to say, hey, just had this Julie's bicycle session, learnt this and this and this, why don't you start thinking about this, this and this? I mean, but I know that we're a tiny, flexible company without any particularly pre-prescribed rules, but it's not so easy for Macmillan to start changing policy. What does it look like from your perspective? Because you're from, as far as I understand it, the biggest company here.
Well, I mean, we have lots of messaging about environmental issues, but whether it's when it's actually practically applied to what we do, that's the difficult part. We very much understand that it's a very important topic, but how to actually apply it practically, and also get our huge Swansea distributor to, I mean, I guess it needs to be air conditioned for a reason.
Absolutely, so it makes
it's
sense
also
to
the kind of
yeah.
thing, like there's huge kind of ways that the company has worked for years to start changing kind of attitudes and start thinking about these important questions. And I guess you just you asked about kind of whether we could do it. I think it's one small step at a time. I guess it's like any grassroots movement for industry. It's just bringing in some ideas and start challenging people, and just to keep plugging away at that. But I mean, when we did have we do have lots of academic journals, and we have the Nature Climate Change is very much in tune with all those messages. It's very interesting to see that even that audience that very much understands the messages, even that, even there was a bit of a backlash, but I guess it's just, yeah.
It's a journey.
Yeah, of course.
It looks like
So we're coming to the end of our kind of scheduled session, and when the other group comes back, we'll just have a share of what they've been discussing and what we've been discussing. I think certainly this group there's definitely some practical takeaways. We need, where we can be emphatic about what the right choices are, we should be, and Julie's Bicycle is definitely committed to pulling those resources together and sharing them with you. And keeping the conversation open where we can with the experts to make that happen. And then I think we've definitely thrown up a lot of questions around how we can influence consumer attitudes, what our supply chain looks like, including the storage spaces we're using, our international relationships and where those can be abused.
Printing techniques.
Printing techniques and advances in how those are changing so rapidly, and not just what that does to the production process, but also the experience of reading the work and what your long-term readership really expects from the work. And those are themes I hope that we can keep alive and keep talking about, so that we can start to test and figure out the best way to.
And I think graphs like that one that Alison showed earlier are very useful, and they sort of mirror what Al Gore did and all of that sort of thing. Yeah.
That hockey stick curve.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Is it available?
Well, after this event, we'll send you all of the materials from the presentations and obviously the footage of the talks once it's edited. And then over the summer, as we finish all the resources we're developing for our website launch in the autumn, we'll share those with you as well. And when our website does launch, we'll have a dedicated
Literature page.
Yeah, for literature. And part of that is really a call out to you guys to send us both your questions, but also whatever you do try and what you're already doing, so that we can use those to kind of chivvy both the Arts Council in the way that they're thinking about this, but also the sector more broadly.
I mean, you'll know it's not easy to make changes because there's often a financial commitment to
Absolutely.
making a change, and if you get it wrong, you're going down the wrong path. You've got to come back and
Absolutely.
reinvest, and that's a gamble people don't want to be the first to make.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why when this comes together, it would be brilliant to take into account the the costing so that we can see at a glance in a sense what the liability is, because that's how we have to think. That's going to be 10% more a year. Can we afford that? How will we manage that? Yeah, especially those of us who do get some of our funding from the Arts Council, which we still get. Touchwood comes around first.
Everyone's waiting for that.
Yeah, it's a weird time to be. Yeah.
We run on such a tight budget that we can't really afford to take the risks, I don't think.
Well, I don't think any of us are probably in a position to take what you call real risks, but I think, again, it is partly psychological, isn't it? Thinking, a shift from thinking that you're not going to make any increase in an area that's environmentally related.
Oh yeah, no, we can make small gradual changes rather. I think at the moment we can only afford to evolve.
Well, I can remember a time about 25 years ago when I came to meetings like this, and we were told that everything would be on CD-ROMs.
Oh, do you remember? Good point.
We should invest in CD-ROMs because they were going to replace books very soon.
Yeah.
Touche.
Things we don't know that will be on the horizon yet for us. Things are moving very fast. Yeah.
Books are still existing.
They're not going away.
Does CD-ROM still get produced?
Absolutely.
I remember that.
Which is, of course, another issue in that we're a massive export market for us. So we do send a lot of stuff on container ships.
Well, we can't not do anything
And then they
ever
go back
again.
empty.
Well, yeah. Well,
For the rubbish.
Where are we going to go here?
I think we're in here now.
Or have we just attracted an audience?
we always do that.
There's a car on the
I think I rather uselessly didn't bring one, or I did, but I've written someone's name on the back of it.
Okay, well, let's do it.
Did you find it interesting?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think in some ways, I feel some of it is a bit further along than we are, and some of it maybe isn't. I'm also, I need to talk to publishing. It's that better when we currently are. I'm sure we'll be able to tell me straight away.
What's your role there?
So I'm quite keen to understand and how this could fit in. So the whole thing is because we want to be able to in diverse places. I guess in some ways we want to know whether this is something we should be championing as part of we do not domestic answer to that.
It's very hard to qualify for individuals from course and gain experience. Cloud storage, electricity usage, I know you put that if you put that one,
I was, but then I guess having someone in the room with
No.
Okay, guys. I'm really loath, actually, to stop the conversation, and I really feel like the time that we had in the breakouts was probably just enough to start asking the right questions and get a conversation going. So I'm really hoping that you'll all stick around and have a bite to eat with us after this, because we've got some lunch on, and it would be great to just keep talking. We thought it would be really good to just do a very, very brief feedback on what happened in each of the groups, so those of you who missed out on the other two groups can hear about what happened. So I guess I'll just kick off very briefly, and of course anybody who is in the publishing and digital group, just shout if I forget anything. I feel like the conversation we had with Peter definitely was asking a lot of questions and raising a lot of issues, probably more than we were solving them, but it was really good to get on the table the breadth of the different questions that we might resolve. So I'll try and summarize what came up. One thing emphatically that came out was where we do have information about the good choices to make, it would be really good to make that very clear, and that's something that I know both the Publishers Association have resources on, and Julie's Bicycle's definitely committed to kind of putting out there for you guys. So especially around paper procurement and different types of the best paper to use, pulling together resources around those and sharing them as a starting point, definitely something we can do. We then talked about different, what digital meant to everybody, and that spanned a very broad spectrum, all the way from managing content on websites, social media, and then in terms of book and periodical and journal publications online, what the experience was for people both reading that, but also what the impact of distributing and storing that material was. And also we mentioned how rapidly printing technology is changing. So digital for Lee, for example, at Calvert's also meant new digital printing technology for print publication, and the impact that was having sustainability-wise for the printing industry, and also we acknowledge the unknowns about how that's going to develop in the future. It's moving very fast, and there's not an easy way to predict where it will take us. We also talked about the international nature of publishing, and James mentioned that they're becoming aware of some publications being picked up out of copyright and printed in massive print runs, especially in Chinese and Indian markets, where it's a lot easier for them to do that, but that's a whole, not just a whole, probably outside of all of the environmental considerations that we're talking about today. And so what is the responsibility of us kind of thinking about that impact as well? Big questions. And anything else from the group? Help me out here. Yes.
So one other thing we talked about was the opportunity to have environmental messages, whether it's digital or on print, and some guidance on some easy things that users could do to reduce their own impact.
Definitely. And then we acknowledged what came up in the morning as well from Andy, in particular, of returns and how often book returns get wasted. So we discussed, we did end up having a discussion about print-on-demand models, and acknowledge the unknowns around that comparatively, whether it's more or less sustainable, again acknowledging that changes the readership experience because they're often not printed on the same kind of quality as alternative printing sources, so we mentioned that. So lots of questions coming up, and I think I'll leave it there, but to say that we'd like to keep that conversation going so we can start to test and arrive at some answers. And we acknowledged the financial implication often for testing out new ways of doing things and ideas, and then the importance there of the research to support that, or the supportive relationship with funding bodies and investors to support risks that might end up in more sustainable practices. So that was publishing and digital. Luke, would you like to tell us a bit about venues?
Yeah, so I was in the venues group. We had a really interesting presentation from Nick, which lasted about 15 or 20 minutes and really, really informative. One of the main bits of feedback from that was definitely taking a really holistic approach to this subject and looking at all impacts. For Nick, some of the venues that includes looking at newts and cattle grazing the land, but also looking at food and the way food is procured, which is a really interesting subject and an interesting way to get people engaged as a kind of side route into bigger issues that buildings have to deal with. We spoke about the need of convincing trustees and not having always the buy-in from trustees on the ethical motivations behind environmental sustainability, and always looking specifically at financial returns, which in some cases the arguments both play in the same direction, but thinking about the scope for perhaps having a representative from an environmental background on a board of trustees to make sure that decisions like those that are brought into place come from the board as well. And then we also talked about venues, buildings being used as a place to showcase renewable energy. We've worked with lots of environmental best practice, and we've worked with quite a few venues already who are doing this in interesting ways, engaging designers and local students in helping interpret data and information about their local community and the way that the building's functioning and how renewable energy is being used on site. So the ambition for some people around the table was to use their building more as a showcase to show off what they were doing and actually share best practice in the sector. Also, we thought about spending the time and making the time to do some of the research yourself as an organisation into what means the best, most ethical, environmentally sustainable decision for you, whether that comes to food or newts or energy procurement, or and putting in the time so that these decisions become kind of systemic and automatic for anyone new that comes in. So having some rigorous policies and guidelines in place is really important, where you're going to change, where you might change building, where you might have regular changes of staff. And then we got just at the end onto finance. Finance is different and can often be localised, and grants can be localised, but it's always surprising for some people to hear that there is money out there and things are possible, grants are possible, to have and bring in measures which reduce environmental impact. If that's something you're interested in learning more about, you can contact Julie's Bicycle about that. We're always happy to share contact details with people, as long as they're happy to share their positive experiences about how they've invested in their building to reduce their impacts. And also just to quickly mention, on the subject of having kind of ethically motivated or environmentally motivated trustees on a board, we're going to have a good governance guide that's coming out. I'm not sure when, but Julie's Bicycle recognise that and are going to have a resource on it too. I don't know if I missed anything else out. No? And I guess we're going to have your presentation to share with anyone that's interested in, and a recording of it as well afterwards. Cool.
We had a lovely discussion about making our literary events more sustainable, in particular featuring Andy from the Hay Festival and also John from the Manchester Literature Festival, who didn't quite get to speak earlier but was very useful in our little group. We sort of honed down quite early on the specific topic of transport and travelling, both audience travel but also getting artists to literary events, because we acknowledge that that's such a huge part of the impact of putting on an event. Audience travel will always be the highest source of impact. So in some ways addressing that is one of the best and most obvious places to start, even though it can be quite difficult because it's not under your immediate control. So, I mean, the key things there are making it as easy as possible and incentivizing the use of public transport. Some of the methods that we went through are, for example, for authors or artists, sharing with other events or venues that are, sufficiently far away that you're not diluting your program, but still close enough that this makes sense from a travel point of view. This can also mean that you can share travel and accommodation costs for authors coming in from much further away with someone else who will then also host them on the same trip. We also briefly looked at the idea of Skyping in someone on a link and the practicalities involved with that. At the moment, sort of to really get a very reliable link involves having quite an expensive satellite setup, but Skype is a feasible option. In terms of dealing with audience expectations, generally it's useful to have someone on the stage interviewing that person, because that means the audience isn't just looking at a screen but has a link. And also, in case something does go wrong with the Skype link, you have someone there who can pick up a conversation, and it's even better if you have a backup sort of plan with maybe someone else in the audience or someone else in situ who could maybe be entered into the conversation if you lose that link. And then in terms of incentives, it's looking at, for example, paying only the train fare for someone coming in nationally rather than paying for private cars, and just making that a no-go as part of your travel policy to begin with, unless the publisher or author want to pay for it themselves, in which case there's not much you can do about it. In terms of the audiences, it's setting up public transport partnerships, setting up incentives maybe with partners such as free cups of coffee for those who do use public transport. Also finding new ways to facilitate car sharing, which Andy did touch on very briefly in his presentation, particularly for audiences that might not be using the latest apps or online applications, and finding ways to get through to them in other ways. Like Andy said, they're working on a project at the moment to use ticket buyer postcodes. There's also, we briefly spoke about the idea of programming shows on public transport forums, and how that's a great way to both make the trip a part of a festival or event, or in some cases just to use your position to make public transport a much more exciting proposition for audiences in general, and get them to see that in a different light. That could both be sort of readings. We spoke about how young and upcoming talent is usually very suited to this. Or in Manchester Literature Festival's case, they have the Read and Ride scheme, in which publishers leave books on the local tram network, and they're going to get the public involved to leave books on the local public transport network as well, and then link that into social media where you can tell where the books traveled through. And also using the power that you have at an event, so if you have a captive audience at the start of an event for those 5 to 10 minutes while you're waiting for everyone to file in, and you can use that to transmit messages both around your own sustainability actions but also about transport. And very briefly touched on involving staff, both volunteers and whatever else, from the very beginning, already in training sessions and when you're recruiting, and also offsetting, which is generally a last resort. But again, like Andy mentioned, sometimes it's nice not to just put the money into faraway projects, but to actually look at where it can make a difference in your local communities in terms of sustainability. I think that's all. Was there something that anyone else wanted to add? Great.
Loads for, like 40 minutes of discussion, so that's absolutely fantastic, and thank you so much to John for joining us from Manchester International Festival. Fantastic to have that learning in the room as well. So I won't bang on anymore, but I really want to thank you all for joining us here today. For us, it's been hugely informative. We're taking loads away and thinking about how we can kind of now support you and your colleagues better to take some further steps on the journey. Please stick around for lunch, keep the conversation going, and we do have some onerous feedback forms, but again, they would be so helpful if you could just spend 2 seconds sharing your thoughts and feedback with us so we can keep improving and building on this work. Thank you to all of our speakers, Peter, Andy, thank you to John for joining us from Manchester, to Nick for sharing your wonderful story of what Arvon's doing as well, and to all of you, and to Free Word, of course, they're not in the room, but thank you for hosting us. Oh yes, you are, hello. We hadn't met before. Brilliant, well thank you, and we do hope you'll all stay in touch, so do join us for a bite to eat, and thank you. Cheers.